Freeman and Maxine Peake filmed their monologues while observing strict lockdown restrictions. Earlier, I spoke to director Nick Hytner and one of the stars, Kristin Scott Thomas. Her monologue, I suggested, features a slightly hard-to-love character.
A woman came in the other day and said, "Did I have any chutney?" I said, "I shall start doing chutney, madam, when Tesco start doing gate leg tables."
She has loves. She has a lot of the antique dealers next door, Derek and Cyril. She's very fond of them. And she has her, I think it must have been her husband or her boyfriend or whatever, or maybe she was just the mistress of somebody long ago who's not with us any longer, unfortunately. So she does live a lot in the past. And she thinks very highly of her own taste and her ability to pick out something really special. Of course, she comes a terrible cropper, and she's a bit of a snob.
It's an interesting thing, Nick, about Alan Bennett, that he writes so well about women. He puts words in the mouths of women so brilliantly, and he said that the two new monologues that you've directed were quite bleak, the women in there. Is that right?
Yeah, well, on the face of it, the subject matter is quite bleak. But I think his great gift is that he can get under the skin of people who you would run a mile from if you met them. Throughout the Talking Heads, there are people who do and say really terrible things, but what he's always doing is inviting you under the skin, inviting you to empathize with people who, if you were applying a normal moral framework to them, would be entirely reprehensible.
In one of the new ones, Sarah Lancashire plays a middle-aged woman who has a bit more than a crush on a 15-year-old boy.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It was suggested by the great 17th century French tragedy Phèdre, but he who is in classical mythology the woman who fell in love with her stepson, and this is something that he's really drawn to. He's drawn to people right out on the moral margins.
How big a crisis, Nick, is theatre facing now? And when we talk of changing the 2-metre rule, for example, will that do it for you, or do you need something else much more dramatic?
No, even with a 1 metre social distance, the maximum capacity any of us would be able to manage, even if we had a go, would be around about 25-30%, which simply isn't enough to run a big show or an opera or a ballet. Most of that won't be able to happen until the other side of social distancing. And honestly, the entire art sector is on the brink of ruin. And that's not just the theatres, that's the great institutions, museums all over the country, it's the independent commercial sector, and it's the vast community of freelance artists that all the producers depend on. And of them, the young are hit hardest, which is the most diverse and adventurous part of our workforce. And then just let me give you an example. This is the time of year when theatres have to start spending on their Christmas shows. It has stopped now, and nobody can do that at the moment because there's been no box office for the last 3 months, so there's no cash. And at the moment, panto season won't happen. Whatever happens to the pandemic between now and Christmas, and panto seasons when entire families go to the theatre and when theatres make the money at the box office that sustains them through the rest of the year. So really, the arts need massive, unprecedented, and immediate investment. And the good news is that if that happens, and it happens quickly, all sorts of good things will follow, because we're full of incredibly inventive people who'll find a way of performing safely if the investment is there. And we're ready to bring life and joy back to communities all over the country. But we do need government to act now, this month, and the word is that the Chancellor gets it. So I'm really hopeful that that's so. But honestly, without it, you can expect wave upon wave of not just redundancies but bankruptcies. We're dependent on the tickets we sell, and we've not been able to sell any.
Last quick word to you then, Kristin Scott Thomas. We heard the passion there, and I'm sure you share it. But there may be some saying there are a huge number of very, very good causes, and you know what some newspapers will write. They'll say it's cash for lovies. Why should the Chancellor reach into his pocket? Why would it be right?
Well, because the performing arts, theatre, dance, opera, music, all these things are really the heart of our culture, and it's so internationally admired. People come from all over the world to come to the theatre in London. You go into any theatre foyer in the West End and you'll hear a multitude of other languages, of people who've crossed the world to come and see this show, this musical. People who work in the theatre go on to do other things in other parts of, they either in film or television, where it's a really fantastic sort of place of nurture for performers. And I think it's really, really important to keep all this alive. Otherwise, our entire, this whole performing arts culture will just disappear. And that is, so deeply rooted in our culture.
Kristin Scott Thomas, Nick Hytner.